and welcome to the Predictable B2B Success Podcast, brought to you by Sproutwith.com. I'm Vinay Koshi, and our guest today is Scott Miller. Scott, you've had quite the career of the years. I believe you started out in politics and then migrated to Disney and then on to Franklin Covey, where you've been there for well over 25 years and now are a special advisor in the company around thought leadership. I'm curious, given all that you've managed to accomplish and done over the years, why is it that you've invested very much into this idea of thought leadership and mentoring? Because I noticed that your latest books are around takeaways from mentors. What is it about thought leadership and mentorship that you feel is something to highlight, if you will?
I think, Vinay, mainly because it's been the lifeblood of my own success. Any success that I've had is because someone believed in me. They invested in me. They brought experiences, successes, failures from their own journey and allowed me to learn from them, allowed me to uncover in myself skills and passions that perhaps I didn't know I had. In most cases, it was because someone believed in me more than I believed in myself. So I'm extraordinarily passionate about mentoring, both being a mentor and a mentee, which we all are, formally and informally. Thought leadership is a little bit of a furry term. It means different things to different people. So I'm happy to unpack that more if you'd like. I don't think you can call yourself an expert. Someone else has to, and you shouldn't call yourself a thought leader. Somebody else has to call you a thought leader for it to be legit. But I think both of those kind of go hand in terms of really unleashing insight and aha moments in other people. That's what both mentors and thought leadership tends to do.
Certainly. And I'd love to dive into that a bit more, but I'm also curious, given your journey to date, what would you say would be your personal area of strength?
It's not humility, it's not listening, it's not patience. I think I've become a good mentor. I'm actually writing a book right now for HarperCollins called The Ultimate Mentoring Guide. And I've identified 15 key roles that mentors play during the process. And so I think I'm becoming a better mentor to people because I understand the roles that mentors should play and the roles that they should not. So for my own 30-year career, but lots of successes and lots of setbacks, lots of messes, not a lot of outright failures, but a lot of setbacks to say, gosh, I should learn from that mistake I made or that mess that I created. And so I think mentoring is both about igniting the genius in others, but also sharing with them, if you were to take this path, here's the positives and negatives, and making sure people understand what the implications are, both positive and critical, of pursuing different journeys.
With this idea of mentorship, what would you say is something that businesses don't know but should?
Not everyone needs a formal mentor. I think we've placed this idea that mentorship is someone with an SVP or an EVP title or in the C-suite on the 7th floor. The only way for you as perhaps a more junior associate or someone on the rise is to have someone up in the C-suite be your mentor. I know I have a lot of mentors in my life. They've never met me. They don't know I'm alive. They don't know I exist. I'm either passionate about their books or their podcast, or I've listened to their radio program. My most influential mentor in my life is someone that I listen to their radio program every night for 3 hours a night from the age of 12 to 22. 10 years, I listened to their talk show, their call-in program. A man named Bruce Williams, a very famous radio broadcaster here. I learned more from him than anybody in my life, and he never knew I was alive. So I think there's this idea we have to break through, that mentorship can be informal. And go find yourself people in your lives, professionally, inside the company. They don't have to be paired with you for a 12-week journey every other Friday at 2 or 3 o'clock. You can learn a tremendous amount from people by just watching and listening to what they do well and what they do poorly.
Well, I'd concur with that as well. I'm curious, though, is there something to be said about a form of mentorship where you can get active feedback on the things that you're executing on?
No question. It's probably one of the key roles that mentors play, right? It's helping you understand your blind spots. We all have them. Most of us don't have the level of self-awareness that we think we do, that we should. Self-awareness is probably the key contributor to your growth, to your promotion, to your influence, to building a greater career and income. And so in many cases, your mentor can become that person that moves outside of their comfort zone, that shows high courage and high diplomacy. And when in a safe environment, they can provide for you pivotal, life-changing, transitional feedback on personality traits you might be exhibiting, communication styles, listening styles, leadership styles. Your mentor could be the key to you becoming a much more self-aware person. And it can also then move into your personal life, right? Quite frankly, we oftentimes segment our personal lives and our professional lives. They're one in 2022. We all kind of have one big life and we're trying to manage it. But the way I act at work is pretty consistent with how I act at home. My professional mentor can help me be a better spouse and neighbor and son-in-law and parent if I let her or let him, invite him or invite her.
With this idea of thought leadership and mentorship, would you say that a key aspect of developing yourself as a potential thought leader, and with this need to grow via mentors, formally or informally, that really we should be looking to invest in our own brand, so to speak? And again, I should probably ask you, is this idea of building your personal brand in sync with this whole idea of thought leadership?
I've never been asked that question before. Let me define in my terms what I think thought leadership is. Because I don't think everyone is a thought leader. I don't think everyone should become a thought leader, or everyone should be referred to as a thought leader. I think a thought leadership, Vinay, in my opinion, is the new public relations for organizations. Gone are the days where companies are calling up the newspaper or the radio or the television, have them come out and cover a product launch or a merger acquisition. I don't know about the rest of the world, but in America, there's very few reporters left to even call in a newspaper. They're covering traumatic events, not ribbon cuttings and product launches. Really, for most organizations, whether you're a mortgage broker, or you're a Fortune 500 pharmaceutical company, or whether you own a hair salon, or you're a real estate agent, your public relations outreach is now you becoming recognized as an expert thought leader in your industry. You don't have to be a published author or have a massive television program or be a scientist to have articles in a magazine to be a thought leader, but you do need to be a recognized expert in your industry. You need to have a megaphone, so to speak, pointed at those people that should be your clients or are your clients, and they should then be directed to you because of your ability to articulate expertise in your area of interest, whether it be how to buy a home or how to color your hair or whatever your expertise is. I do think you can be a thought leader in your industry, but it takes credibility. It takes, I would think, if not decades, certainly years of trial and error, mistakes, and you have an articulated point of view again on why someone should do it the way you say to do it or pursue it the way you think it should be done. You have to earn this right for others to determine you, recognize you to be a thought leader. Now, separate from that is your brand, right? All of us have personal brands, whether they're created accidentally or intentionally. You have a brand, and what you think your brand is probably different than what other people think your brand is. And that congruence, bringing your perception and quote, their perception together, is crucial for you to understand, have you created the brand that you want? I don't think you designate yourself a thought leader. I think that's probably a misnomer. Over time, you become a thought leader because enough people rely on your expertise and your experience. At the same time, everyone has a brand.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to recognize that often our brands are created accidentally and in sometimes snap judgments and in single instances. And that's unfortunate, but important to recognize that even a short encounter with someone on your worst day can create a brand for you. So you've got to be super mindful of how you choose to show up in every interaction, including today. It's, 6 o'clock here in the evening in Utah. It's, probably 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning in Brisbane, Australia. I chose to come on early. You chose to come on early. And immediately we established a brand with each other that we're taking this podcast seriously, that we respect each other. And so we've already established a brand with each other just through our actions, because we both decided how we were going to show up this evening and this morning on this podcast.
That's a very different perspective than some of the things I've heard to date. So thank you for that. I'm also curious. So With this idea of the fact that everybody has their own brand, whether they create it intentionally or otherwise, does that mean that given an organization and all the people that work in it, we should really be promoting certain individuals to be a thought leader as opposed to others? Or is that something we would encourage an entire organization to develop given their specific fields of expertise?
Sure, this is simply my opinion. As you mentioned, I served as the Chief Marketing Officer and the Executive Vice President of Thought Leadership for over a decade for the Franklin Covey Company, one of the most recognized and most trusted leadership names in the world. And so I would probably choose to elevate the term thought leadership a little higher up for the conversation, because I don't think everyone is an expert. I don't think everyone is a thought leader, nor should they try to be. Maybe at some point, everyone can become an expert on something. That's not everybody's pursuit. So I don't think everyone, I would again separate the idea of brand with thought leadership. At Franklin Covey, not everybody is a thought leader by any stretch. You'd have 2,000 different thoughts on things. We very deliberately work with individuals that have thought leadership expertise on strategy, building cultures of trust, productivity, time management, sales performance, leadership. You get the point. Not everybody in our company is a thought leader. Doesn't mean that they don't have thoughts.
Yeah.
And they're not a leader, perhaps, but we tend to reserve that designation, if you will, for people who spend an inordinate amount of time thinking about, testing, researching, speaking, writing, podcasting, perfecting points of view, and then staking a claim for the company that we think will help our clients. At the same time, everyone in the company has a brand. Your brand might be that you're punctual. Your brand might be that you're thoughtful. Your brand might be that you're impetuous. Your brand might be that you change your mind a lot. So I separate those ideas. No, I don't think every company should be elevating and designating people as a thought leader. Now, that doesn't mean you don't build a culture of inclusiveness. You don't encourage dissent, that you don't ignite and encourage people to have positions and opinions. But that doesn't mean that everybody's position or opinion or thoughts define a company's point of view, their value proposition. Otherwise, you'd be chasing hundreds of ideas and everyone would think they were representing the company. Now, they are in terms of their actions and their competence and their character. But I think at Franklin Covey, not everyone is a thought leader. We would probably designate about 8 to 10 people as a thought leader, and they're very clear themselves on what the boundaries are of where we want them to think and become an expert and help us build credibility on. Does that make sense? That's my point of view. That may be different than others think of it, but I got a few chops in this topic, so that's what I'm saying.
So from what I'm hearing, it would seem to me that if you're investing heavily in that 8 to 10 people that you picked out, that there needs to be some sort of strategy in terms of developing them.
Yeah.
How would you go about even thinking about constructing a strategy for these people?
Yeah, some of it's quite simple, right? One is, do they have fields of experience in the topic? If someone doesn't have experience leading people, hiring, firing, interviewing, coaching, being an ally for, having high courage conversation, then they can't be a thought leader in the leadership industry. If someone doesn't have significant reps, so to speak, in the sales side, both as a sales producer and a sales manager and a sales leader. So the first is you got to have fields of experience. You can't be a thought leader on topics with which you've not faced hundreds, if not thousands, of interactions with. That's the first. Second, I think thought leadership requires most people to have a really broad skill set. Because if you're going to become a thought leader, you've got to be able to articulate again your position in a variety of mediums. You've got to be able to write well, whether it is best-selling books or articles or journals or columns or blogs. You've got to be able to podcast well. You've got to be able to articulate your thoughts on camera. You've got to have some level of credibility and charisma. You've got to be able to speak in front of 5 people and 5,000 people. So you've got to be able to be comfortable in a variety of media settings, both taped and live, radio, television, on stage. And so you've got to be able to have a broad skill set in terms of presenting your ideas, but at the same time have the depth of expertise on that topic. Because you can take someone that's got on-camera presence with a big vocabulary, but if they don't have decades of research-based and practical experience on a topic, then they've got no depth in it. You also don't want to have people that are extraordinarily well researched on a topic, but they can't carry a conversation and bring energy and passion and influence to a setting. I think it's a calibration of all those things. So we're very thoughtful, making sure that we elevate people of different ages and genders and profiles. And we have a very inclusive thought leadership from people around the world, making sure that we have not just white males from America as our thought leaders, because it's more than that, obviously. So we take great thought and care into who we tend to elevate. And we also have tiers of thought leadership. We have our primary 6 or 8, and we have our next kind of bench strength. We have our kind of up and comers. And so we're building bench strength in 3 levels, if you will, at the Franklin Covey Company. We don't allow people to designate themselves as thought leaders. We take some gravitas around that. I think the term has been used a lot, maybe even overused the last 3 or 4 years. So we take some maybe extreme deliberation in how we use the term.
How would you identify an up-and-coming thought leader? What would you be looking for?
First, it's someone probably that has passion about a particular topic. Franklin Covey is a leadership development company. We have expertise in about 5 or 6 areas. I mentioned some of them: productivity, time management, leadership, culture, sales performance, execution. And so we look at individuals that really meet that criteria. One is they've got a depth of competence on the topic. Second is that their values and their character are congruent with our values and character. We don't want to elevate someone that later in life we learned that they've had some other indiscretion or some breach of our values that embarrasses the company, because our reputation, quite frankly, is more valuable even than our intellectual property. Our reputation is our most valuable asset. So we're quite deliberate in not just vetting people, but letting them know that they're a public face of our company, both on the clock and off the clock. They post on their social media. So we have to make sure that people can have a voice and a life and a personality, but they recognize that when they post something on their Instagram, it reflects on the company. And we've had some very seasoned thought leaders take companies to task for whether it was an airline or a hotel. You have to call them up and say, do you realize they're a client? Do you realize that you just posted on your Instagram is like disparaging one of our clients? Do you have the whole story, or are you just reacting like everybody else on Instagram? So that's the second thing, is we have to make sure we coach them, give them media training to make sure that they're authentic and genuine and credible, but they don't cross the line and they know what the boundaries are. Now, the stakes are high for thought leaders because, what you write on social media, what you print in Fortune magazine, that's there forever. We've got to make sure that it's not Pollyannish, but that they take a point of view that is responsible and reasonable, that has an edge to it, that has a point of view, but it's not necessarily polarizing, because that could be bad for the brand. We also make sure that they have time to think, because at Franklin Covey, we believe that thinking is a legitimate business activity. And this is often counterintuitive in a fast-paced 24-hour-a-day world where you're judged by your most recent results or this week's pipeline or sales numbers. So we try to take a long view. And sometimes that means not necessarily a sabbatical, but really having time to research and listen and interview, to travel and think with our clients. What are they facing? Does the research back up what the actual experiences are of our clients that are succeeding or failing? Anyone who wants to earn their way into becoming a thought leader also has to have a point of view and organize their time, structure their day, prioritize their values around having time to think. And thinking requires listening. And those aren't always the most easy topics to master in 2022.
If I could put this another way, would you say that a key component would be for someone to expose themselves to a plethora of perspectives and ideas to encourage and build their worldview around a specific topic?
Certainly. You just named it, right? It's curiosity. Is all of our thought leaders have an insatiable level of curiosity because they recognize they don't have the full truth. Their paradigm, their mindset is skewed towards what they think is right. And so any thought leader worth his or her weight is going to constantly be testing their own assumptions, going out trying to disprove themselves, that their humility is a strength. Because with thought leadership, you can earn some arrogance, right? We've published enough books and sold enough copies, and you're earning $30,000, $40,000, $100,000 for a speech. That builds some swagger and some arrogance. And so you've got to be thoughtful that you are surrounded by people that remind you of the importance of humility, that put you in challenging situations to push on the validity of what you've been thinking. I don't know that anybody in our company that's a thought leader hasn't changed their mind, that isn't open to be influenced. Now, some of them have perhaps more arrogance than they do humility, and that's a hard thing to teach sometimes, especially if you're older and have sold millions of copies of books. But at the end of the day, I think you nailed it, is constantly challenging your worldview, constantly recognizing that your paradigm, your mindset is never full or complete or 100% accurate. And that your job is to go out and constantly press on yourself to give your clients, your readers, your followers, the freshest, most current thinking drawn from your new experiences and really challenging your worldview.
Let's bring in the idea of mentorship. For an up-and-coming potential thought leader, what would be the kinds of mentors that they should be looking for? Should they pretty much be thinking there are key areas that I need to improve on, identify those, and then find mentors who would be able to speak into their lives around those key areas? Or is that something that you as an organization work with them on in order to help them address at least a few fundamental areas?
Yeah, we all have mentors for different things. We have mentors to grow our careers, to grow our businesses, to challenge our paradigms. It's an interesting question because as you were asking the question, I was going through my mind 8 or 10 key thought leaders at Franklin Covey, I wonder who their mentors are. If you ask them who their mentors are, would they say Peter Drucker or Ken Blanchard or Bob Iger from Disney? I don't know what they would say. You can ask me that because at least one person in the world has called me a thought leader. I did have the title of Executive Vice President of Thought Leadership. My gosh, I could name right now a half dozen people who are my mentors. I have a mentor as an entrepreneur growing my business. I have a mentor that helps me as a father and a spouse, make sure that I'm doing my best in those roles, and they aren't the same person. I have a mentor that helps me with my writing. I have 4 books I'm releasing in the next 18 months. I've released 5 books in the last 2 years. So I have mentors for different reasons. So I would hope that anyone who have been designated a thought leader, again, you can't call yourself a thought leader. Somebody else has to refer you to that because you've earned that credibility. But I would hope that they would have mentors, perhaps that were content specific. Like, for example, one of my areas of competence is in marketing. Like you, I'm privileged to host a podcast, what is now the world's largest weekly leadership podcast. So I have mentors in marketing. I have mentors in podcasting. I have mentors in interviewing. I think the word mentoring sometimes is interchangeable with coach. Not always, but sometimes. When I think of a mentor, Vinay, I think of someone who's wiser, who's more seasoned, who's made more mistakes and had more successes than I have, typically in my field of interest, but not always. I'll tell you, one of the key attributes that I look for in a mentor is not someone who is always the expert and successful. If I want to know how to keep my marriage going, I look for people who've had 3 marriages, which means 3 divorces. Because I want to know what not to do. Because in most cases, I can't replicate the genius of somebody else. I can't replicate their successes. I don't have their education, their background, their personality, their confidence, their trust fund, you name it. So if I want to open a business and launch a business, I look for someone who's had 4 bankruptcies because they've learned a ton about what not to do, because it's more likely that I can avoid and not do the things that got you in trouble than I can absolutely replicating the things that made you successful, because you're unique and you have talents and passions and skills that I cannot replicate. I can learn from them also. But I usually seek out mentors that have tried to do what I've done and have failed. Now, maybe they succeeded later. Maybe they failed at that, but succeeded in something different. But I tend to learn more from people's messes than I do their success.
That's an interesting perspective, given that most people tend to gravitate to those who have achieved high levels of success and try to copy that.
And of course, that's grounded, Vinay, in the position that in failure, there's success, right? Some of my biggest successes are from what I've learned from my biggest mistakes. I've been fired. I've been demoted. I probably learned more from those humbling experiences than I ever did my biggest leaps. I once leaped from earning 100 grand to 200 grand overnight in a job, doubled my income, 6 figures. What I learned from that, I don't know. I could talk for hours about what I've learned from when I was demoted, when I was fired. Pardon the dogs. I don't specifically seek out failures. I like to be mentored by people that have learned great lessons and are generous and humble enough to share them with me, that they are confident enough to say, let me tell you about this failure I had. And they can dive deep into it, perhaps sometimes intimately. I can think, wow, so this led to that, and then that led to that, and then that became that. Wow, I never connected all those together. I can see how that could happen to anybody, including me. And that's where I think has been the biggest, where I've been the biggest recipient of mentors, is not just picking the obvious people. By the way, most of these people that have had these big failures have also had successes as well, but that's just my point of view, and it's served me very well. I've written multiple books in the Mess to Success series, management mess to leadership success, marketing mess to brand success, communication mess to influence success. I have 3 more coming out in a couple of years. I just like leaders and mentors that are confident enough to say, hey, gather around. Let me tell you about the biggest sales deal I ever screwed up, and the 7 things or 4 things I did wrong, and get deep into it without being an open confessional or walking around confessing all your sins all day long. That's not what I'm talking about. I think the best mentors are those that have the confidence to judiciously share the mistakes they made, if they can be instructive to the mentee.
I'm also curious. Obviously, this idea of thought leadership and certainly mentorship would indicate that relationships are a key fundamental component to all of this, and perhaps to your own growth and success. How would you suggest that we keep ourselves at that cutting edge, if you will, of being able to build relationships through remark-worthy experiences? And maybe I can just expand on that a little bit. You noted that we both came early onto this podcast. Not many people do that. And that itself leaves an impression because of our experience. So how do we keep ourselves at that place where we're always looking to build on the experiences that we have with people? Because I'm of the belief that those experiences deepens relationships.
Certainly. In fact, I'd argue that, I'll back up a little bit to answer your question.
Sure.
I'm going to pick my dog up. I have a new puppy that's wanting some attention. I apologize for those on camera. He wants some attention. And then he'll get bored and he'll leave. People are not an organization's most valuable asset. That's human resource bunk. Stop saying that. Stop repeating that. People are not your company's most valuable asset. It's the relationships between your people that are your company's most valuable asset. Because Vinay can be a Rhodes Scholar, and Scott can have a 6 Sigma certification and black belt, or whatever. But if you and I can't get along, complement each other, cover for each other, forgive each other, pre-forgive each other, then we're not needed. We're just geniuses in our own. So relationships are probably everybody's most important skill. Everyone is in the business of developing relationships. Everyone. Whether you are an individual contributor, or you're a frontline manager, or you're a senior director, or you're the CEO, or you're the board of directors. No matter what role you're in, you are in the relationship business. Whether you're an engineer or an anesthesiologist or a commercial airline pilot. Now, obviously, commercial airline pilots have more probably technical skills than project managers and salespeople do, technical skills. But at the end of the day, you are in the relationship business. Don't forget, that is simple but profound. And everybody watching and listening to this needs to self-assess. How am I at developing and maintaining and keeping and ending relationships? That's actually just a great sort of rhetorical question. I have 3 sons with my wife. Their sons are 8, 10, and 12. And I can see one of them watching me off camera here. You're on screen, just so you know, son, as he slinks away. They're excited to go to dinner when we're done. It's a beautiful summer night here in Utah. He had a friend at school, and they're both 10. They were having some interpersonal conflict, and it was becoming an issue. And at one point, I said to my 10-year-old son, the one that was in the background here, I said, I think your friend, let's call him Tim. I said, I think your friend Tim is just trying to learn how to become a friend. He's learning how to become a friend. But I was in an audience a few weeks ago, hundreds of people. I said, raise your hand if you're still learning to become a friend. These were six-figure CEOs, and everybody raised their hand, their 40s, said, I'm still learning how to become a friend. And so I think it's safe for everyone to recognize that we're all learning how to develop relationships. This is an ongoing skill. And how I friend you might be different than how I friend somebody else. We have to friend people differently based on their needs. Because remember, the golden rule is treat others how you want to be treated. Hogwash. Stop repeating that. It's the platinum rule. Treat others how they want to be treated. Don't treat people how you want to be treated. Treat them how they want to be treated. That requires you to get to know them and invest in them. Now, having said that, there are some consistent principles when it comes to developing great relationships. First among them, make and keep commitments. Sounds simple, so important. Your reputation is merely a collection of all of your behaviors and your decisions. Make and keep commitments. Yep. And if you can't keep a commitment, then own up to it. Call up your friend and say, you know, the block party next Friday where I always bake the 400 brownies, I can't do it this year. I apologize. I'm so overcommitted. I'm telling you now versus leaving you in a bind next Friday. You get the point. Number one, make and keep commitments. Number two is to recognize that all relationships are grounded in trust or lack of trust. When I ask most people, are you trustworthy? Everyone says yes, but the key is you don't get to decide if you're trustworthy or not. Yeah. It's the other person decides whether or not you've behaved yourself into a reputation of being trusted. Do you make and keep commitments? Do you honor confidences? When someone shares something with you and says, please don't tell anybody, do you keep that as a secret? Or do you go and say, oh, don't tell them I said this. This and this is just simple kindergarten kind of stuff that gets all of us in trouble. Do we listen as much as we talk? Do we declare our intent in conversations? All of us have hidden agendas. Do we actually open a conversation and say, hey, first, can I declare my intent? My intent is not to derail your project. My intent is not to make you look bad. My intent is to help you land your project look great. But first, I need to get answers to 3 questions that I have that are very important to me. I think it's these sort of fundamental skills that help us to build relationships. But of all of them, I think it's the first one is, quite frankly, is do you make and keep commitments is fundamental to developing trustworthy relationships. If you just do that, you'll transform your brand, especially with mentors, because as a very nature, mentoring tends to be a little bit hierarchical. Oftentimes the mentee is more junior than the mentor, either in experience or age or income or stature or education or title, whatever it is. And a mentor does not have time to invest in someone who isn't going to be punctual and honor their commitments. And at the end of the phone call or the meeting, you say, I'm gonna go do these 3 things. You come back 2 weeks from Friday. Yeah, I didn't have time. Well, I don't have time to mentor you if you don't have time to do what we agreed upon you were going to do. Yeah. So keeping commitments is the ticket to the game.
Certainly. Yeah, I would agree with that. Also in a broader sense. With this idea of relationships, I'm assuming that you're looking for feedback in order to ensure that you're on track with the other person. Are there certain milestones or flags, if you will, that you're looking for as you progress in the relationship, regardless of whether it's in a mentoring form or some other form?
Yeah, it's obviously very situational, right? My relationship with my wife, Stephanie, is very different than my relationship with my business partner who lives in California. My relationship with my employee who's 26 is very different than my relationship with my Catholic priest. But I love your question. So I have a puppy, so he has no boundaries. So I apologize to your listeners and viewers. It is what it is. That's the one good thing of the pandemic. Like all the rules are off now, right? Your puppy can bark in the background and it's okay. I hope. I love your question because it's rooted in, again, self-awareness, right? It's rooted in, do you know what it's like to be in a relationship with you? And you probably don't. So you should be asking. You should be asking your partner or spouse, what's it like to be married to me? You should be asking your kids, what's it like to have me parent? You should be asking your leader, what's it like to lead me? You should be asking those who work for you, what's it like to be led by me? This takes a lot of courage. Absolutely. This takes you being open to feedback It takes you asking simple questions. Hey, Vinay, we've worked together in the same team for 6 months, 3 or 4 projects. I'd love to know, genuinely, I'd love to know what it's like to work with me on a project. Now, Vinay, I want to role play with you. I want you to give me some critical feedback, some negative feedback. Go ahead. Give me some negative feedback of what it was like to work with me on a project. Just go ahead. Role play with me. Just make something up.
So
give me some negative feedback.
I often feel that you don't want to know enough details.
Oh, Vinay, that's not true. Whenever we're in meetings with Tom is always just driving me crazy, and I work with such incompetent people, and I don't have time. You get the point. You cannot do that. You cannot do what I just did. You cannot ask someone to give you feedback and then dispute it, refute it, disregard it, dismiss it. None of that. Because I intentionally interrupted Vinay with some arrogance, because what are the odds that I'm going to ask you again and you're going to come out with negative feedback again, critical feedback? No.
Next to none. Yep.
Because I just proven to you that I'm not capable of genuinely wanting it. And this may be like rudimentary to some people, but I think this is a really good conversation, is that when you want to mature your relationship with someone, the best way to do that is to ask them, what's it like? We're walking partners. We get up every Tuesday morning. We walk at 5 o'clock in the morning. What's it like to walk with me? How much do I listen versus talk? Do I walk too fast? Not enough? My breath smell bad? I need to shower. You get the point, right? If you ask these questions, and when the person tells you, don't do what I did, listen, close your lips, don't say a word, and count to 10. Now, for those who aren't on video, I just literally counted to 10.
Yeah.
And by the way, I'm pretty uncomfortable with silence. That was a long time for me. But some of the best ways to develop your relationships is to genuinely ask someone for feedback, specific feedback, recognizing that most people will only give you positive feedback. They don't want to risk you not liking them. Most people are cowards.
Yeah.
That's not a character flaw. That's a personality trait. People grow to be more courageous with you when they trust you, when they understand your intent. Hey, Vinay, I would love to be a better project partner with you. I'm sure there are things I've done. I'm sure there are things I could improve upon. I am going to ask a favor of you. I'd like for you to maybe move outside your comfort zone. And I'd like you to think of some specific things that I've done over the course of our professional relationship in these last 3 or 4 projects that you think I could tighten up, that if I were more aware of them, that it might build my reputation, that I might be more trusted by you and by others. My credibility would increase. I really want to know. I won't interrupt you. I won't negate them. I'm genuinely interested. And by the way, I'm going to just be quiet and write down in private anything you tell me. And then without question, I do not interrupt Vinay. And Vinay says something to me. When he's done, I might say, you know what? That took a lot of courage. Thank you for sharing that. That kind of hurts, to tell you the truth, but I'm so grateful that you cared enough about me to risk that awkwardness. Hey, can I ask you a question, Vinay? When I do that thing you just mentioned, do you have a sense for why I do that? Do I seem insecure or jealous or threatened? Or I actually want to know, you must have some insight. You're not a psychiatrist, but you must have some. I'd love to know why you think. You get the point, right? If you could ask peel the onion questions, but your motive needs to be pure. Your motive needs to not be, yeah, I really want to see if he knows what he's talking about. No, your motive needs to be, wow, that took some courage. I must have a blind spot around that. I need to learn more about that. I hope your listeners and viewers find this valuable, because this can be formative in your relationships if you're willing to put someone in that vulnerable position, not just you, but the other person, and do not ever undermine them. You also can't fake listening and then later punish them. That's just, people do that.
Yeah.
10% of the population tend to be sociopaths. And so you got to be thoughtful that if you really want the feedback, then you've got to be open to take it and recognize. I'll tell you what I'll tell people. When I ask for feedback on something, which I do frequently, I say, I got to warn you, it might take me about 4 or 5 seconds to come around. So just judge me on the totality of my reaction. I promise you I'll get to a good place. I might have to walk around in a circle and stew on it for a few seconds, but just trust me. Everybody has a different style. But I think that's some good advice that I just offered.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Just going back to this idea of thought leadership, as you're developing a strategy, do you, as an organization, also look at developing certain metrics to help people ensure that they're on track with their overall development around thought leadership?
We do. Obviously, it would be different per organization. Obviously, social media is a significant channel for pretty much every organization and person. And so we often look at what engagement looks like. And is it driving interest and leads to our website? Are people downloading white papers or filling out forms and getting videos and tools and that kind of stuff that we can actually nurture and hopefully convert to interest? Obviously, the only reason for thought leadership is for marketing and public relations. I guess self-serving ego satisfaction is one, but the reason an organization has thought leadership is you're waving a flag. Hey, look at us. We have hard-won reps on this topic. And if you're interested in solving this problem, then we're the people to help you solve that problem. Whether you're a plumber, electrician, a hospital, a hotel, a thought leadership company like we are. And so our metrics are generally around how many books has that person sold? How many podcasts are they being booked on? How many radio programs? How many keynote speeches are they being booked? What does their engagement look like on social media? We tend not to fall victim to a lot of the soft measures. I mean, like how many likes do they get? Or I think shares is good, and how many comments there are. And quite frankly, how do you convert those comments to a conversation, to an engagement, to a phone call, to a webinar, something like that? So we obviously tend to have our thought leadership at the very front of our funnel, the very front, right? Someone buys a book, and then perhaps they follow that person on Instagram or LinkedIn, or they read their column in Inc. magazine, and then they begin to maybe join that person's webcast or podcast. They visit the website, they download a form, you get the point, right? And now they're interested in buying our services. But your thought leadership tends to rest up at the top or the very front. And I think it's a long-term thing. I don't think you can think you're going to write an article in Fortune magazine and go book 7 face-to-face meetings, right? It tends to be a long, nurturing process of building your voice, building your credibility, building your followership. So when someone next year, quite frankly, is looking for a keynote speaker, they put your name on the list. When someone is thinking about bringing somebody in for a professional development day or whatever your service is, which happens to be our world, I'll tell you, most of my keynotes come from someone who started following me 2 and 3 years ago. And they've learned my voice, they've learned my personality, they've learned my expertise, they've bought 3 or 4 of my books that I may or may not know about. And I think thought leadership is a little different than marketing. It is marketing, but it's not place an advertisement in the newspaper and tomorrow you sell 15 cars at your local dealership. It's kind of seeding the ground and building a reputation that shouldn't be measured in terms of hours or days, but like months, quarters, and years.
I'm sure that we could spend an hour or 2 more delving into the depths of thought leadership and mentorship as well. But to wrap things up, is there an aspect or maybe aspects of thought leadership that you feel doesn't get highlighted or talked about very much? If so, what would they be?
That's interesting. I've been asked that question before. Let me ponder on it a second.
Sure.
My answer would be this, Vinay. I think thought leadership has 2 components. The actual expertise, the earned credibility of having thought about a topic and now being a leader on that topic. And then the distribution of that thought leadership.
Sure.
Because I can be the expert on acrylic nail application, but if no one knows that, then it's not useful. So you've got to balance the amount of time and energy you spend both with perfecting your craft and articulating your expertise and its distribution. Distribution meaning whether it be in a webinar process or webcast or column or blog or Instagram or Pinterest or TikTok or writing a book or you name it. And you've got to be comfortable in those modalities. We have some thought leaders that are extraordinarily expert at their topic, but they can't give a keynote speech in front of 1,000 people to save their life. So it's like, so how do we use them? So when we pick thought leaders, we do balance. Like I said earlier, does the person have platform skills? Can they articulate, not just write it down, but can they actually get on a podcast and hold their own? And so I do think it's a balance of both. You've got to balance both skills. I don't mean that scientists need to become charismatic fire blowers on stage, right? But you've got to be able to grab people's attention, both in terms of your personality and your delivery and your competence in terms of your research. There's an important balance of both. So for those of you who might be more EQ based and you have a big personality, you're well spoken, a high energy, you can't be a flim flam artist. You got to have tough, deep reps and experience. And for those of you who might be more comfortable behind the scenes and in researching and practicing, you may have to move outside your comfort zone. It's a term I've used many times today. You might need to stretch your skills and disrupt your natural comfort level and put yourself in positions where you improve. Now, if you are a scientist that is an introvert, I don't recommend that you go do a TED Talk tomorrow. You probably need to get a speech coach and you need to get a mentor and an advisor and build those skills and start presenting to your family and understand your cadence. But I think that would be my answer, is recognize both sides of thought leadership, both the expertise and then the effective distribution of where your clients are. Because here's a good example. If I'm selling a solution that the CFO buys, I'm probably not looking for a viral video on TikTok. That's probably not where most Fortune 5,000 CFOs are. So you've got to make sure that your megaphone is pointed in the right direction of the people who need to know about your expertise. That probably is the third component, is making sure that you're not just speaking into the wind charismatically about your expertise, that you're pointing it in the right direction where the people that need to know about it can find it.
Brilliant. To interrupt things up, Scott, if you were listening to this episode, what would you say would be your top takeaway?
Perhaps use the term thought leadership a little more judiciously, right? Talked about it a lot. It was our theme. Yeah. Thank you for letting me articulate that. I just think I think it's become dangerously ubiquitous, and we don't call everybody an expert. We don't call everybody a physician or an attorney. You have to earn that. You have to pass a test to be an attorney. You have to pass medical school to be a thoracic surgeon. So I think my takeaway would be, let's use that term with the earned respect it needs to be. And not everyone should be a leader of people. Not everyone should be a thought leader as well. Some people are expert at distributing the thought leadership. Some are expert at selling the thought leadership. Some are expert at executing and adopting the thought leadership. We all have our roles. I would just probably elevate that term to those people who choose to put and pay the price to earn that moniker from someone else. Don't call yourself a thought leader.
Thanks for that. Scott, if listeners are curious and wanted to find out more or connect with you, where would you recommend they head to?
Well, I'm hard not to find. I'm on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, LinkedIn. You can visit scottjeffreymiller.com. scottjeffreymiller.com. That's my website where all of my podcast episodes are, radio programs, my columns, all the books, all the articles, everything is at scottjeffreymiller.com.
Terrific.
Thank you, Vinay.
Scott, thanks so much for doing this. Appreciate you taking the time out.
Such an honor. Nice meeting you. Enjoy your winter. You're in winter now, aren't you?
Correct. Yeah.
I have a friend that's going snow skiing this week in Australia. It's like 100 degrees Fahrenheit here in Utah. So interesting. Have a great day. Nice meeting you.